So in this video, we're going to be looking at debt. And there are different perspectives on debt, but in general, there's some debt that is actually not so bad. Some debt that is actually considered kind of good debt. And then there's a lot of debt that is really bad debt that you really want to avoid. So good debt is debt for something that appreciates or gains value in time, or something that allows you to earn a higher income over time. So think about this for a second. Which of these, maybe a car, a house, a vacation, or school tuition, which of those could be good debt? So it might involve going into debt. You'd have to borrow money and pay interest on that. But the thing that you bought will actually grow in value with time, or allow you to earn a higher income. Give it for a second. Hopefully you said a house or school tuition. Both of those things are good debt. So when you buy a house, usually the value of that house will go up with time. So even though you're going into debt to buy a house, the value of the house increases with time and hopefully will actually increase even more than the interest that you pay on the house, or at least keep up with it, so that you're actually not losing out in the end. When you sell your house 10, 20 years, 30 years down the road, you'll actually be able to recoup the interest that you paid and maybe even earn some more. School tuition is the same sort of idea. So many people have to go into debt to go through university because it's very, very expensive. But at the end of the day, you'll be able to get a job that is much higher earning than if you didn't go to post-secondary education. And so it pays itself back, and usually in a really big way for depending on the field. Bad debt is debt for dead horses. So that's a description of something that's value drops with time. So once you buy the item, it's worth less tomorrow and worth even less a year later. And so you can never sell it and recoup what you originally paid for it. And certainly you can't sell it to recoup what you originally paid for it, plus all the interest that you've paid on your debt. So which of these look like bad debt to you? So car payments, if you buy a car and you pay into that every month, that would be a debt. If you buy furniture and go into debt for that, if you buy a wedding, weddings are very expensive. If you buy a new phone, which of those would be bad debt? Think about it for a second. Unfortunately, all of those are actually bad debt. So all of these are things that drop in value with time. A car, as soon as you drive it off the lot, is worth less than it was, considerably less than it was on the lot. Cars drop the largest amount that they drop in their values in their very first year. So a car that's just 1 year old is worth much, much, much less than it was when it was brand new. And so as you continue to pay your car payments, you're paying for a brand new car, but now your car is 5 years old, and you couldn't sell it for nearly even half of what you originally paid for that car. And you've also paid a whole bunch of interest on top of that. So a car is actually an example of a really bad debt, and it's something that a lot of people go into debt for. But there's ways to avoid that. So buying a secondhand car that you can completely afford straight up, so you can buy the entire car just from your savings. It's a much, much, much better idea than buying a new car where you'll be paying interest on that debt for many years. Furniture is another example. Way better to buy secondhand furniture that you can afford right off the bat than brand new furniture that you have to go into debt for. A wedding, maybe it sounds controversial. A marriage certainly does not drop in value. There's a great deal of value, much beyond the monetary value of a marriage. But the expensive wedding, and many people spend tens of thousands of dollars on their wedding, has no value immediately after it's been spent, right? That's gone. That money cannot be recouped. So it's worth saving up for a wedding, but also maybe scaling back ideas is not a bad idea, so that you don't need to go into debt for a wedding. It's not a great way to start a marriage in debt. Similar idea to a new phone. You don't want to go into debt for a new phone. Buy something that you can actually afford. Let's look at credit cards. So credit cards are often where people can rack up a lot of bad debt. And there's some really interesting psychology behind credit cards. My husband's a social psychologist, so he gets to tell me these interesting studies. It turns out that people actually spend a lot more when they're using a credit card versus paying with cash. So this is just one example of a really interesting study where people were buying ingredients for hosting Thanksgiving dinner. So you would think like this is groceries, right? Groceries are a necessity. It's not a luxury item. So you think there's just sort of a set amount of money that it costs to host Thanksgiving dinner. That's not true. If you send people to the grocery store with cash to buy their Thanksgiving dinner food, they'll spend on average $145. If you send them to the same grocery store with a credit card to buy food for the same Thanksgiving dinner, they'll spend $175 just because they're using a credit card. So why is that? Why is it that Thanksgiving dinner costs more with a credit card? Well, it's because that the pain of pain is just less noticeable. When you're using cash, you're aware of how much you're spending. So you think, oh, I don't want, maybe I don't really need this particular brand that's more pricey, or maybe I really don't need that extra side here, or whatever, or this extra flourish for my table. Some of those little extra items that sneak in there, you'll be more aware of, and you won't purchase if there's a little bit more pain of pain. You see the cash leaving your hand. The challenge with credit cards is that it's just so easy to tap them, right? We don't even have to like type in our PIN anymore because there's like the tap feature. You just tap it and the money's gone and you don't even see the money disappear. So because we're not seeing the money disappear, we don't think about the reality of what we're spending, and it leads us to actually spend a lot more. So there's a psychology behind using credit cards that causes you to spend more. So let's do a little problem involving this. Unfortunately, only about half of Canadians actually pay off their full credit card bill each month. And one of the biggest challenges with credit cards is the interest rates are very, very high. So whereas other interest rates you might get are maybe 3% on a mortgage, or maybe 5-6% on a line of credit, you'll actually pay 20% interest on your credit card, which is huge, and it's compounded monthly, so it really, really adds up. If you don't pay that credit card bill, which about half of Canadians are not doing, that causes two things to happen. So first you have to pay interest on what you owe, which gets really, really pricey. It also causes what's called your credit score to suffer. Credit score is basically a measure that banks use to see how reliable you are. And so if you're not paying your debts down, then banks will be a little bit more worried about lending to you. That means that they'll charge you more for borrowing in the future. So when you go to get a mortgage or something like that, they'll charge you more for the mortgage than they would to someone else. So it is really worthwhile to try and keep your credit score good. So we'll just do a little calculation with this. Let's say you owe $5,000 on your credit card and you decide not to pay it back. So it's just one credit card bill, but you don't pay it for 4 years. We'll see what you owe. So the initial amount you owe is P, and this actually works in our compound interest formula the same way that savings did. So with savings, we would put P in as being the initial amount that you saved. With debt, P is the initial amount that you owe. So initially we just owe $5,000. The R is the interest rate, but it's the interest rate per compounding period. So interest rate is 20%, so we convert that to a decimal, that's 0.2. But it's compounded monthly, so we need to divide it by 12, which gives us an R of 0.01667. T is how many compounding periods go by. So over 4 years, something that's compounded monthly will be compounded 12 times per year. So we're going to do 4 times 12, and there's going to be 48 compounding periods. And then we get to use just our compound interest formula. So A is P times 1 plus R to the power of T. We can plug in all of our numbers here. P is the $5,000, R is the 0.01667, so it's the interest rate per compounding period. T is the number of compounding periods, which is 48, 4 times 12 per year. When you toss it all into your calculator, you actually get $11,054.58. So it's actually more than double that single credit card bill in just 4 years. And people often struggle with paying back credit cards for much, much longer than 4 years. And this rate grows exponentially. So over time, they can spend tens, maybe even hundreds of thousands more on a simple credit card bill. One way to think about this is that if we bought, say, a $5 chai latte on this credit card, that actually cost me more than double for that chai latte. I actually spent $11 on that chai latte. And when I think about it that way, maybe I would think, maybe I shouldn't have bought that chai latte after all. If I bought it with cash, I probably would have felt more pain of pain, and I might not have made the purchase. So how can you use credit cards responsibly? There's a few things to make sure you do. So first is always pay off your whole credit card balance every month. So don't just sort of pay half of it down or a little chunk of it down, pay the whole thing. always, always, always pay your credit card bill on time. That's a huge factor in keeping a good credit score and, of course, avoiding those high interest charges. You can actually use your credit cards to help you budget too. So you make your budget, right, for the month. You figure out what do I want to spend on what, and then your credit card is actually a nice way to kind of track what you spent. So at the end of the month, you can look back and say, oh, okay, I spent this much on this item. Maybe I'm going a little over budget on clothes here, and I need to scale that back a little bit. So you can look through your credit card bill to see if you're meeting your budget, and that can be helpful. But you also might want to consider some alternatives too. So if you're finding that reduced pain of pain with using a credit card, that's just so easy to use a credit card to make purchases that you really don't actually need, then it's probably a good idea to actually start bringing cash with you when you shop instead of a credit card. It feels a little less convenient, but it'll save you a huge amount of money if you're paying with cash instead of a credit card because you'll be held back a little bit from buying things that you actually really didn't need after all. Another area of debt that I wanted to warn you about is buy now, pay later deals. So this is a real advertisement that I found last year, and it's for the Don't Pay a Cent event, and it sounds really, really great. So you have no payments, not even the taxes, fees, or interests until 2020 on everything in their showrooms. So it sounds like this wonderful deal, but I looked at the fine print, and it took me a long time to find the fine print. So this was easy to spot on their website. This Don't Pay a Cent event deal. But after about like half an hour of searching online, I finally found that there actually is an interest rate associated with this deal, and it's actually even worse than your credit card. So the interest rate associated with this deal is actually 24.9% compounded monthly. So it's even worse than a credit card. And what's worse about it is that this interest accumulates from the day that you buy the furniture. So let's say you buy $3,500 worth of furniture. You have 18 months of no payments with this supposedly great deal. So you have 18 months to not pay anything at all. But during those 18 months, interest is accumulating that whole time. So let's see how much that furniture would actually owe. How much you'd actually owe for that furniture at the end of the 18 months if you can't pay it right away. Your P value here is how much you're initially borrowing, because this is actually it seems like just a cool deal, but it's actually a loan, right? You're taking out debt to buy the furniture. So P is $3,500. The interest rate that you'll be paying here is actually higher than the credit card, so it's 0.249 or 24.9%. It's compounded monthly, so we divide that by 12. T is how many compounding periods there are. So it's compounded monthly, and you're allowed to not pay for 18 months. So T would be 18 months go by. When you toss all that into your compound interest formula, what pops out is actually $5,000 and $5,065.44. Way, way, way more than you initially spent on the furniture, and that's if you could pay it quite shortly after the 18 months is up. If you can't pay it right away, then it just keeps on accruing interest and keeps on growing as time goes on. So this is actually not a deal at all. This is going to cost you a lot more for the furniture in the long run. So beware of those things that look like deals. They're actually not deals. If you're taking out debt to make a purchase of furniture, I would pretty much never recommend doing that. Way better to get secondhand furniture. You can get fantastic furniture secondhand rather than buying something new that you really can't afford. Why does this matter? There's so many reasons why debt matters, but one of the impacts of debt is actually on our health. So it turns out that people who are in debt actually are 3 times more likely to have a mental health episode than people who aren't in debt. It has a really strong negative impact on our mental health, which makes sense. It's stressful to be in debt. So how can Christians respond? Debt is a huge problem. There's a lot of people who struggle with debt. So one way that you can respond is with charities like Christians Against Poverty. Christians Against Poverty is a wonderful charity. So what they do is they work with people who are in just overwhelming debt that they cannot possibly pay back themselves. And they help that person by taking on the person's debt and talking with all the creditors themselves, and then helping that person create a budget to slowly pay the debt back And often they're able to negotiate with creditors to reduce interest rates or even get the interest rates to disappear entirely on the person's debt, which is huge, and help that person slowly get back on track. They also support the person emotionally because debt has such a negative emotional outcome. There's numerous stories of people who attempted suicide before CAP got involved, and CAP was able to get them back on track financially, but also emotionally too, which is pretty cool. Say you run a business someday. As a Christian running a business, think about how your business is impacting your customers. So buy now, pay later deals are great for the company because they cause people to buy much more than they should, buy things that they really can't afford, and then they force people into situations where they're in debt that they can't pay back, and so they have to pay really high amounts of interest on that. But schemes like that are really making a profit off of other people's financial illiteracy, and I think they're really wrong. So if you run a business someday, don't offer those kinds of deals. Think about how your business is impacting your customers, and impact them in a positive way. Another key thing that we can do to respond is to live generously. So if we keep our own expenses low, we avoid bad debt, we don't go into debt for things like a car, things that will depreciate in value, and we keep our overhead costs low, then we're able to be generous with others. And that's a really, really important thing. And the last thing that is particularly relevant in this time, this is a tough financial time for a ton of people in this pandemic. Literally millions of people have lost their jobs. So this is a really good time to be reaching out to your neighbors and friends and offering emotional support, as well as practical support. So maybe making a donation to a food bank, maybe making a donation directly to a friend that you know that needs a little bit of financial help. But if you can't do that, you can still offer emotional support because being in debt is really isolating and really scary for people. So reaching out to them is so important.